friends. Welcome. And thanks for joining us on the Lead with Love, Love Wins podcast for conversations with changemakers. I'm Lauren Beller. In this series, co-host Sherry Hodds and I chat with guests who are making changes in their world at work, at home, and in community. They're gaining self-awareness, compassion, and courage to make a difference and are kindly sharing their wisdom, challenges, and experiences with us so we can all learn from their leadership. Thanks so much for being part of this journey. You can learn more about our work with leaders at changemakernation.com. Now let's begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lead with Love, Love Wins podcast with Sherry and I. And today I have a very special friend who I'm very excited to have a conversation with, and my friend Laura, who I've known for a very long time. So as we get started, I want to dive right in and introduce Father Scott because there's so much to talk about. And rather than Sherry and I having this conversation by ourselves, I think we just all need to dive into this conversation. It's a beautiful topic, in my opinion. And before we do that, Father Scott, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are, why you do what you do, and anything else that you feel like sharing?
Oh, thank you. I'm honored, and thanks for having me. It's a true honor to be here with the Changemakers. So I am a 46-year-old priest in the Diocese of Albany, New York. So that means I'm a parish priest serving anywhere in an area of 14 counties north of New York City, about 2 hours north of New York City. I was called to the priesthood when I was 18 years old, but I did not want to do it. And I spent 20 years trying not to follow my calling. And eventually I couldn't do it anymore. So I was ordained at age 38. And priesthood is both exactly what I was born to do and a very ill-fitting suit for me. I am very out of my comfort zone, taking a vow of obedience, being part of a large institution that is perceived by people in lots of different ways, not all of them positive. I'm challenged quite often by living this calling, but it doesn't change that it's what I was meant to do. I have a lot of interests, and so I have a background in journalism, and that led me to being an exchange student in the Up With People program, where you live in host families, do community service work, and travel around the world with a musical show. I did that for 2 years when I was just out of college. I've worked at a hospice house as a grant writer. I've been a school bus driver. I've been an executive at a foreign exchange travel company. I've been a high school teacher for 5 years, got a master's in religious education, and then taught middle school before entering the seminary and becoming a priest. So I have a very mixed, checkered background, and I'm honored to be able to serve in the way that I do. I know that I make a difference, a positive difference in people's lives every day because of the work that I'm privileged to do. And I'm very clear that it's a privilege to use my position in the church to help people, but I'm very clear that I work directly for God and not for the church. The church is the vehicle that I use, but my orders come from God. And sometimes those orders are also filtered through my superiors, but I'm very clear on who it is that I'm called to follow.
I love so many points that you just made. The one that sticks out for me that I just have to wrap my head around and my heart around is the fact that you're following your passion, yet you're so challenged. And I think that's such an important point for us all to hear, that sometimes our passion is not always easy. Sometimes our calling is not always easy.
It's one of the things that confirms for me actually that it truly is my calling. And I say that without a strong sense of exactly the lines of argument I would make to support that statement. I just know that all of my friends with children, all of my friends in marriages, all of my friends who feel called to work that involves helping others or deeply connected to justice, they readily admit it is hard. It is difficult. Parenthood is incredibly challenging. Marriage is incredibly hard, or partnership. it is all of the things that are truly callings, I think, bring us beyond where we are comfortable.
Mhm.
And I think that by just definition means that they're challenging and hard. So I appreciate that the priesthood is really hard for me so often, because I guess I would say there are times that this fits me so well, I could think that I'm using it to meet ego needs.
Mhm.
And the fact that it's really hard reminds me that I'm following something deeper, because not all my ego needs are being met. In fact, many of them are go unsatisfied.
Yeah. Such a beautiful point. I just that we have to figure out how to underscore that in a bigger. There's a book there. There's something about commitment, passion, commitment to because that's how we learn, right? That's how we grow as humans, is to be challenged. So how
Hmm.
I've gotten connected to you is really a beautiful, simple story. And it's what the reason I'm going to share this really briefly is one of the things that is so beautifully unique about you that you also bring to all of what you do is your most amazing heart and your ability to put words to what your heart is feeling. So I met you through a letter that came in the mail because we have a mutual friend who's not here today, Pam Hassett, and she shared my difficult struggle story in 2018. And I got home one day and in my mailbox was a letter from you that just touched me so much and had me know that there was people paying attention and supporting from coast to coast with all that I was dealing with. And
Wow.
you just have the ability to touch people. You don't even know. I mean, we didn't even know who he was. It was such a beautiful, so thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your heart and your words and your prayer with me as a stranger across 3,000 miles,
Thank you.
3 years ago. Yeah, it was such a gift. Seriously, such a gift. Yeah, so thank you
I'm
for that.
so
And
glad.
that's a model too of how do we serve and who are we serving and how are we serving? And it doesn't matter what we do, but how do we choose to serve every day and support the people around us? Anyway, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I feel that. And I feel one of the things we are called to do, there's a line that Mother Teresa once said. She said the real life-changing moment in her life, there were many pivotal moments, but the one that was really the biggest pivot for her was when she realized that God wanted to communicate love to the world. And the way she realized she was involved in that is, she said, God is writing a love letter to the world every day and wants me to be the pencil. Wants me to be the pencil writing that letter. And I think that gets to the heart of why I would want to write somebody who is not part of my church community or maybe even part of my faith tradition, but who is going through a struggle that I've heard about and can relate to. I want to serve that invisible force that's between all of us. I mean, that's one of the things that makes my work so satisfying is I serve invisible realities. I serve invisible connections. And it's remarkable that I'm part of such a large organization that serves what would be the word, an animator, a leader who many people believe doesn't exist and whose presence can't be proven. I mean, it's just a remarkable thing. But one of the things that I want to do is just as body workers tell us that so often it's not the muscle that contains the real heart of the issue, it's the fascia all around it. It's the fascia. And I feel like that's what I do spiritually, is I'm serving the fascia of life. I go to that connective, it's the fascia that links us, even though I'm on one coast and you're on the other. And even though I'm not a parent and your struggle involves parenthood, I understood. I understood the power of showing support and being that we're connected by fascia, and that's what I serve.
Yeah. So many, there's so many points that I want to make. I want to take a little bit of a turn only because there's a couple baseline things that I want to have people share about you. The other way that I was most recently just taken by such sweet surprise by you was sweet video that you did about our intention wheel and how you've been using it and striving to make your world better over the course of many years of using it. You've been using our intention wheel for a long time. Can you give us a little nugget and insight as to how you see it and how you use it?
Absolutely. The intention wheel has been a real gift to me because Lauren, your work has inspired a lot of folks to go into coaching and advising and work of their own. And so I'm connected to you through my own professional coach who helps me, who's been mentored by you. And I am absolutely convinced that intention is everything. I'm absolutely convinced by it. In fact, to speak about a formal religious sense, the connection in a formal religious sense, it is intention that determines if something is sinful or virtuous. It's always intention. The same action can be sinful, virtuous, depending on the intention behind it. So when I was introduced to your goal wheel and understood that it was all based on intention, that even though I come from, this traditional 2,000-year-old religious tradition, it was very familiar to me that is what is going to direct the goodness, the value of what I'm doing. So I'll give you a great example of that intention wheel for me. I recently have known that it was likely, because of some restructuring in the church locally here, that I would be asked to take on a new assignment, and that to do so would interrupt my strategic 10-year plan that I was in the middle of, and would serve the needs of my superiors in a way that I may or may not value personally as a leader or a change maker myself. And so I was really straining against how my promise of obedience to this larger authority would coincide with my well-being and with how I wanted to let the intentions in all the different areas of my life, my health, my spirituality, my relationships with family and friends, how I wanted that to manifest. So my goal for this year has been shed the dread, because I was being just swallowed up by dread about what my future might entail. And I could not imagine a scenario for my future that was better or more hopeful than where I was doing the work according to my timeline that I was doing. I think because I've been doing this goal work through your process for several years, I think my intuition really engaged in what I needed my intention to be. I think my intuition was very engaged because after I chose Shed the Dread as my goal for this year, I had 2 close calls with perhaps being asked to go to a new assignment, which would be a very big ripping away from my church family and sending me to a completely different professional environment with goals that I had not yet set. And I'm here to tell you that actually has just been made official this past week. I am actually, what I dreaded is happening, but because I had done so much intentional work around shedding that dread, I learned that what I had to do, if I didn't want to dread, yet dread was knocking on the door, was turn all of the energy that I was going to use dreading and resisting and fighting back and pushing away, I was going to turn it into creativity. What is it? How can I use this? How could this be a springboard? How could it be a trampoline? How could I see, especially because I've told you that I serve this invisible force, how could this be that God, my higher power, is asking me to do this, and I just can't see it? In the 12 steps, I do a lot of work as a priest with people recovering from addiction. And the 11th step of the 12 steps is to pray for nothing other, no outcomes at all. No outcomes, to give up praying for outcomes, but to instead pray only for knowledge of God's will for my life and the power to carry it out. And that to me is just so universal. So shed the dread is my way of saying, I choose to trust that the will of my maker can be revealed to me in many ways, including improbable ways. And I can choose my response to that. And I choose to shed dread and replace it with creative energy.
Awesome. So beautifully said. And when we live intentionally, my experience is that when we live intentionally, which, and the Laura and Sherry know deeply what it means to live intentionally these days. When we do that, I believe our intuition is much more engaged, so that they actually go together. When we start to truly live intentionally, so that our bodies feel what the intention is, then our intuition is much more engaged. It's a fascinating relationship between the two. So I agree with that. I think there's something to your point about intention and intuition is more attuned. Yeah,
I think
beautiful.
it's so interesting, Father Scott, because when you're talking about that, and what Lauren's saying is that this intuition and the intention are make you more aligned and clear and open. It sort of creates this channel where you can receive, right? And you've spoken a couple of times about resistance to that too, right? Early on when you were resisting your calling, and now resisting this new opportunity that's in front of you. And I wondered, I have many questions about that, but I'll just ask, like, how yes, you're using intention now. How have you used it throughout your life and career in order to realign yourself? If you know what I mean. When you're in resistance, you come back to intention and intuition.
I guess I remember reading in a book when I was in my 20s, something that means something much more to me now than it meant then. But in the book, The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck, he gives a definition of mental health that I find just so powerful. He says, mental health is a commitment to reality, no matter the cost. It's the commitment to reality. So I get what I would, and I just love that. It means so much more to me now than it meant then. But even then, I knew that meant the comfortable lie will always appeal. I will always be willing to turn away from what is real and uncomfortable and replace it with something fuzzy and manufactured and uncomfortable and more comfortable. And I guess what I've found is I've learned that asking God, the universe, my higher power, however you understand that fascia, asking what would make me flourish? What is it that you're calling me? This life is not for nothing. It's clearly not for nothing. I may not understand it, but my life is not for nothing, and it's not for mediocrity, and it's not for miscellaneous tasks. I have a mission that I may think my ego may have a parallel mission or a rival mission, but there's a mission that was authored in me from another source. And I need to use my intuition to help me align with that, because I need to get very uncomfortable with what it feels like to accept the comfortable lie, because true mental health, true wellness is a commitment to reality at all costs. So I'll give you an example of that in my own life. I continue to be a recovering compulsive overeater. And it took a lot of work with a behaviorist dietitian for me to understand that I needed to really feel what the feeling of hunger was like, and really feel what the feeling of being overstuffed was like. And what this dietitian uncovered for me, behaviorist first and dietitian second, uncovered for me is I was allowing myself, the story I was telling myself was a story of fear about being hungry. But when I paid more attention, I realized that most of my suffering was coming from the pain of being stuffed. And what then that would do to my body. I think we are called, and I think that the goal setting process orients us this way. We're called to not allow ourselves to be numbed into not recognizing what we're really feeling. And for me to not be a priest was a lot more comfortable. It was a lot more comfortable to not be told where I had to live, to not be told that I'm living a celibate life, to not have to hear news stories in the news that I may or may not agree with coming from the hierarchy and have to then be the public face of that for people later. I had to learn how to manage the discomfort of that, knowing that the comfort of avoiding that was not true, was more corrosive, over time would rob me of my joy and my purpose. So committing to reality, no matter the cost, means, I remember the author Carolyn Mace once said, one of the greatest causes of our suffering is intuition, because it tells us things we don't wish to know, but they're true. If our intuition tells us it's the truth, and we have to be willing to bear the discomfort of our intuition guiding us and say, I will be obedient to that because it is my GPS. It is my GPS. And there's no reason to be comfortable without GPS, knowing that we're lost.
I love that.
It's better to be uncomfortable and be on the right track.
That's right. You're saying the resistance, I mean, the suffering comes from the resistance, in other words. That's where the pain lies.
The suffering comes.
Yeah.
I agree with that statement. I do. But it doesn't show up at first. It feels more like numbness at first. I think because we can tell ourselves, this is okay. I'll give you an example. I was teaching high school theology classes before I was a priest. And it was not my calling, but I was making a deal because I didn't want to be a priest. I didn't want to take the vow of obedience and celibacy. And so I said, hey, look, God, I'm teaching kids about theology. I'm doing it. Aren't I doing it? And I wasn't. And I knew it. But I said that to the universe, but I knew I wasn't. I knew full well that I wasn't. But I stalled there for 7 years because it was comfortable and it looked to me and to others like I was. I still got to, look like I was working in what I was called to. But I knew that I wasn't. But the discomfort of facing reality at all costs was a little too much for me at that time. I wasn't mature enough yet. It took me getting into my 30s to say, all right, if this is real, then it's faceable. Anything real is faceable.
Yeah.
Mental health is commitment to reality at all costs.
Such a good line. I read that book in my teens, and it's one of my favorite books. That's worth going back to after all these years. That is just a precious book. Thank you for that. Thank you for the reminder of that. Laura or Sherry, I want to take another turn, but before I do that, is there anything else either one wants to add? You, Father Scott, anything else anybody wants to jump in here with thoughts? Sherry's got something.
If you're okay with it, Laura.
Totally.
Okay. I really love what you were saying, because what you were saying was about the resistance. And you also said, I'm here for a greater purpose. I'm not here for miscellaneous stuff, right? And yet you had said you had this checkered past where you're doing all these different things. And I believe that it's not a mistake, right? It's not accidental, these miscellaneous things, or this, what you call checkered past. It's all towards the greater calling. Do you agree with that, or what would you say about that?
I 100% agree with that. And I'll give you an example. My undergraduate degree is in journalism, and it appears to the outside world like I've never used it. Like I don't report on things. I don't, here's what I've learned. The reason that my funerals, when I preside at someone's funeral, which is something I do on average 65 times a year because of the size of my community, when I preside at someone's funeral, I know about headlines and leads, and I know about how to not bury the lead on someone's life, because I'm a journalist at heart and in training. And so what I'm able to do is do a portrait. I'm able to create word portraits of people's lives, slideshows in words that show how there was great meaning and connection throughout their whole life. If I had not been a journalism major and wasted all of that money, so to speak, all of that money on that degree, that wouldn't be in my toolbox. I worked at a corporate job, as I told you before, where as soon as I started working there, I knew it wasn't right for me. I knew that as soon as I got there. But what I now realize on the other side of working there for a year and a half is that I learned some of my best lessons about being a leader, because it was my only chance working for a for-profit company. And those entrepreneurs that I worked for, they knew how to hustle. They never asked anything of us that they weren't doing more of, which is something I think that's a real sign of an entrepreneurial spirit, where there wasn't a time that a manager of mine couldn't do my job better than I could. I learned the value of that kind of competency and integrity from being in a job that was actually wrong for me. It actually felt wrong. I struggled a lot during that year and a half, but I realize now looking back, that was not wasted. As a matter of fact, that may have been one of the most valuable year and a half periods in my whole life. So I agree completely with what you said. It's so true.
I think it's really interesting, Father, when you talk about the resistance and the pain and dreading or shedding the dread. It's always that hard fear to know that God knows better and to truly put it into his hands. And as much as we want to every day and try and pray for it and think we're doing it, are we totally turning our lives into God's hands and knowing he's going to put us in the right spot? And I think that's part of our resistance, maybe the intuition that God's given us a nod here, like this is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely feel that way. And, I guess one of the things that I do as a former teacher, I always like giving people homework of sorts when they come to meet with me that will actually be useful to them. And sometimes I worry that I'm a little bit too pedantic or prescriptive, but I think there's a value in certain things like memorizing the Serenity Prayer, so that it's actually muscle memory, to be able to say in any situation, what do I need right now? I need the serenity to accept whatever I can't change. I need the courage to change whatever I can. And I need wisdom so I don't waste my time on the wrong one. I love, now I just paraphrase that prayer, but I'll give people sometimes, for those of you who know the Catholic tradition, there's a very healthy, actually it's got a bad reputation, but it's very healthy, the process of confession, where you go into a room and you say out loud before God, yourself, and another human being in the person of the priest, the exact nature of your wrongs. A lot of folks would say there would be a lot of people that would need less help from other helping professionals if they would avail themselves of just the cleansing of that kind of process once in a while. But one of the parts of that process is the priest gives someone just a tiny bit of spiritual homework to do, a tiny little thing that might be helpful for them as they go forward. And I have found that one of my favorite things to do is to offer people the chance to memorize that prayer. Because if you can memorize that prayer and apply it, you can get through so many things, to believe that God knows better than I do. And as Oprah Winfrey would say, she paraphrases it as the very best prayer you can offer is just use me, use me. And don't ever say that to a human being. Don't ever say to a human being, use me, because a lot of us know the hard way what happens when you do that. Yeah. But if you say it to God, God is worthy of being said, of being approached with a use me attitude. But we do it with humans instead. Why do we do that? We should do it with our maker.
So good. So good. Before we, there's lots more to talk about. So let's get to the topic at hand. And I realize that there's been so many nuggets already shared. So this topic that we said that we would talk about today, about freedom, it's one of my favorite topics. I love when it comes to July that I revisit it, and I have done it since I was probably in my mid-20s. Like, what does freedom mean? And I feel that there's such a connection between freedom. I always said that Viktor Frankl had it right? The Statue of Liberty, freedom on the East Coast, and there should be, he said, and I didn't know he said this and read it because I had said something similar, that there should be a statue of responsibility on the West Coast because we need both. You can't have one without the other. So it's right, so critically important, because one does not happen without the other. So you and I were back and forth a little bit in email about this topic. And I always feel like if we want freedom, we have to ask ourselves, what am I going to be responsible for in order to create the sense of freedom that I want? So I'm curious how you see this topic and what's on your mind about this topic today.
Oh, I'm thinking about a lot of things. I'll tell you, one of the first things that I'm thinking of is the idea that responsibility, I think, often feels a bit like a pejorative on first listen. I'm not positive that everybody takes it that way, but it's my responsibility or it's your responsibility is something that I think we can hear our parents saying when we haven't been as accountable as we needed to be. That was your responsibility and you didn't do it. So you need to have this consequence. And I think that's, and that's kind of what I hear that. And so I do think we would love freedom without responsibility. We would love total autonomy without accountability. But like you said, they are of one cloth. That doesn't happen. I will say that one of the things that there's two principles on this that have been part of my life that I've learned over the years. One of them is there is a difference between responsibility and accountability that I find really interesting. And this also comes a lot from addiction work. It helps people to understand what it means for someone to feel the burden that life can put on our shoulders. So here's an example. If it is true that being an alcoholic is a disease, which is what we hear from those in the helping professions, that it truly is a disease, where does free will come in connecting to that disease? A person who is an active alcoholic, what can you say about the fact that they have a disease, and yet there are other recovering alcoholics who are not drinking? And in recovery, they have this distinction that you can be not have responsibility for something, but have accountability. So here's what is often said in the realm of addiction. You are not responsible for being an alcoholic. That is a disease, but you're accountable for your actions, right? Because no one else can be. And that to me, that distinction is really, it feels a little bit like responsibility. Whose responsibility is this? It sounds like something an angry bird would say. Who's responsible? But I would say that accountability, for me, the word carries just a little more agency. I am accountable. It's measurable. I can do it or not do it, and I can explain why I did it to the extent that I did, which is why I think your goal method now of showing just how far, what's my level on this? What is my level on this piece of the pie? Am I an 8 or I'm a 2? Because I can be accountable for that. So that's one thing I'd like to share. The other thing I'd like to share is I think one of the things that the American sense of freedom contains that may at times be helpful and at other times not be, is we always think of our freedom as being freedom from things. I'm free. I don't have to wear a mask at this Starbucks because I'm free. I'm free from anyone telling me what to do. I'm free from. We always think of freedom in terms of what we don't have to do because we possess it. And I think that it's much more powerful to think of freedom as being something that makes us available. I'm free for this. Can you take my kids to swim team? Yeah, I'm free. I'm free to do it. I'm free. Freedom for. I feel like that goes back to what we were talking about with intention as well, where there's a great line in scripture, and I can't tell you the citation because Protestants are better at that than Catholics. We're not so good at telling you exactly where you can find it, but we heard it someday. Jesus says, "To whomever much is given, much will be expected." To whomever much is given, much is expected. And so I find that is freedom for, in opposition to freedom from, allows me to say, I am free to live into the full capacity that I have. I'm free to do that. I'm free to be as I was made to be. I'm free to step into my calling and my mission. I make myself free for that rather than I don't have to wear headphones in this place because it's a free country. Freedom for instead of freedom from. I think that for me is it's a part of recognizing that I'm part of something bigger.
Sherry, you're going to say something.
It just reminds me of, it just speaks to what you're talking about, Father Scott, is the idea that once you know for which you are responsible, there's so much freedom in that. Right. You don't have to struggle to find out what's mine. I have a stake in the ground, and I know what I'm responsible for, and then now I'm free to do that for which I'm responsible, and free from the wondering and the worry and the anxiety about what's mine.
I think the accountability part is a big part of leadership as well. You may have team members under you or with you or what have you, and they know what their responsibilities are, but the accountability is that they do get it done. And if they don't, they explain why, or if they have a problem, they come to you, or the accountability is, yes, this was done when it was expected to be done, no matter what the situation is. It doesn't have to be business, but that's the accountability too, versus responsibility. Oh yeah, you told me I should do that, but I didn't get it done, type thing.
The ownership, it's owning it, is what you're
Owning
saying.
it,
Yeah,
owning it.
the
Yeah,
ownership of it, and the sense of I want to be accountable for my part.
right.
Yeah,
Ownership is a good way to put that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Own our responsibility, so we do have the freedoms to grow.
yeah, yeah. We own our responsibilities so that we have freedoms. That's great. That's a great way of saying it, Laura. Yeah, it's a topic that I feel like is such a big, important topic. And it seems to come as this 4th of July, like it's a, I love July and I love Independence Day. And I think there's so much depth. It's almost like the holidays, like there's so much more depth to the message of that, of this time of the year, right? And I hate to see it go by every year, year after year, without having such an important conversation about how beautiful life can be when we take our accountabilities, our responsibilities to heart, and realize the freedom that that gives us when we do that. And it's the gift of it. And people, we don't understand it until we embrace it in that way, in my mind. Or maybe over the years, as I've matured, I see, wow, there's such a gift in responsibility, such a gift in responsibility. So I see it that way these days. I get to own this piece of whatever it is, and I get the freedom now to do this because I've done my part.
I don't know if anybody has read the book Bossy Pants, the memoir that Tina Fey, the comedian, wrote. She says something that comes to mind as you say that. She said the answer to everything in life is the same as the answer to everything in improv comedy. She was looking back over her road to Saturday Night Live and what she was doing. And she said the first rule, and this sounds like a restriction, it doesn't sound like freedom, but the first rule of improv is whatever anybody else does on stage, you have to say yes to it. You have to say yes to it, because if you don't, there'll be no skit. You can't say, oh no, you're not a teapot. No, you're not somebody's mother. You have to say yes to whatever ideas somebody else brings. But she said, but that's not enough. Your job is to say yes and add something, add what's yours to add. So if one person says, if your colleague, if the other actor on stage says, I'm a little teapot, you have to say, and I'm a cozier, you have to say something that builds on that idea.
Yeah.
So that it looks like a restriction, but it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility as one of the actors on stage.
Yeah.
It is your responsibility to make sure that you say yes, but you're not restricted. It's freedom for yes and.
Right.
Then you offer your next. I just love it. I just love it.
Too.
And I think it's the author Mark Nepo who said,
no, go ahead.
Yes. Mark Nepo says, this is the best part that we could ever be cast. If we were somewhere else learning about the human life, we would say, if we were an actor and we got the script for our life, we would be like, oh, that's a tremendous part. I want to play that. Yeah. You know, we would audition hard for that part because it's the part of a lifetime.
So good. That's
literally.
Good. And this goes back to the point that you brought up at the beginning that Sherry underscored of, you know, when life presents us with something, it's our responsibility to say yes and. In other words, I was presented with an opportunity last week and it was a no for me, but I said, yes, that would be awesome. And I can't take it on right now. It was like, how do I embrace the yes? I love the yes and with the resistance going back full circle. Like when you went to the corporate world, you said yes to that, but only for a year and a half. Yes, and for a year and a half. So good.
That's so helpful.
I love
Thank you for putting
that.
it that way. That's right.
Well, you said it. I'm just wrapping not Tina Fey, somebody else's points around it.
But also think of how it affects me right now, because just last week I was told that what I was dreading is coming true. And I'm going to be going an hour and 20 minutes north to another parish. But you just freed me to say yes to this, and we'll see how it goes. And
Yeah.
we'll see what I do then. And there's the freedom. I have the responsibility to say yes to this.
Right.
I've taken a vow of obedience to the bishop, and the bishop has asked me to go. So I have a responsibility to go. But my end will be responding to whatever I find there, because I have to be committed to reality at all costs. I've made that's a prior commitment that I've made.
Yeah.
And so my and might be, as you just said, maybe it's for a year and a half. The answer is yes. And I'll let you know more.
Exactly. As I learn, as it unfolds, because we never know how it's going to unfold. That's the beauty of the whole thing. So we need to start wrapping up. But before I do that, Sherry, do you have any more points you want to ask, make? You always have such great points. Laura, you too?
I'll just say this was wonderful. I'm blessed that it was a small group. I enjoyed hearing all what you had to say, and it was very wonderful. Thank you.
Father Scott, I love that you brought the yes and. That's something we use in coaching as well. Actually, we steal from improv a little bit in coaching. And what I love about it too is, yes, we know what we're responsible for, and we make it our own, and we get to make more people right when we say yes to them, right? That's yes, and we get to make some other people in the world right. And there's so much positivity and optimism about making more people around us right, instead of the no. Love it.
That's great. That's so helpful.
Are there any other points or point that you want to make, Father Scott, before you wrap up?
Well, you know what? It just came to mind that one of the rules in the spiritual life that was given by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who's kind of a famous saint, 16th century Spanish saint, and he's the one who founded the Jesuits. And so all over California and all over the country and the world, there's lots of Jesuit institutions that people are familiar with. But he said that you must always, when you're discerning between two things, you always move in the direction where the freedom is. Mm-hmm. That was one of the words he used. You move toward the freedom. And the problem is that if we're only looking through the lens of freedom from, we'll choose the easiest, the least, the thing that calls the least amount from us, the thing that demands the least. And he's inspiring us to recognize what true freedom feels like, which is much more like yes and.
Yes.
So I just love that. Freedom is the sign that you're on the right track, if you feel a sense of freedom. And in my case, and here's the great paradox, my greatest freedom came from taking a vow of obedience.
Crazy,
How
right?
crazy is that?
Life is so fascinating, isn't it?
Absurd.
Ultimate responsibility.
Absurd.
That's right. That's right. So I had my second bodywork session with you mentioned body workers. And one of the things he said to me, Michael Rubano, this week, oh my God, you guys would all love Michael Rubano. If you ever get to San Diego, I'll introduce you to him. He's just the sweetest soul. And he said to me, I had this revelation the other day. And I said, what's that? And he said, the word realize is actually when our real eyes see. And I thought, that's brilliant.
Oh.
Isn't that brilliant?
That is.
And you're bringing such important realizations to our conversation today. So I so appreciate the realization with such real eyes, because I feel like real eyes come from the heart, not here. Like we realize things, we start to live from here. And you're pointing over and over and over today. You pointed to that. So I so appreciate the conversation. One of my favorite things are conversations like this. So we'll be posting this on social media so many, many more people can watch it, I hope. And I really appreciate your time today. It was a gift to be in your presence and for you to share your nuggets on freedom and intuition and goals and checkered past and how important they are. And I appreciate all those nuggets. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Lauren, thank you. thank you for what you've unleashed in your work and the fact that someone that you lead has led me and led me to you. And I thank you, Laura and Sherry, both too. What a great conversation. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Great to see you,
Have a
Lauren, and
wonderful
Sherry again. All right, God bless us.
See you, Laura.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Love you.